In this video, I'll be talking about 11-7. 11-7 discusses how we can use multiplying by fractions as a scaling type problem. The question that we're going to focus on in this video is, how can we use our reasoning skills to determine the size of a product? So how can we use what we know about numbers and fractions and products in order to determine the size of a product without even multiplying, which is pretty cool. There are three basic rules that we will discuss in order to help us use these reasoning skills to determine the size of a product. The first rule is that if you're multiplying a number by something less than 1, the product will be less than that original number. The second rule says that if you multiply a number by 1, it stays the same because anything times 1 is itself. And finally, if we multiply a number by a factor greater than 1, the product will be bigger than the number we started with. I'm going to show you an example of each to help this make a bit more sense. So if I had 3.5 times 2/3, and I want to know, is this going to be bigger than, less than, or equal to the number I started with, 3.5? This would be rule number 1 right up here. If you multiply a number by a factor less than 1, so I'm multiplying by 2/3, the product will be smaller than the number that you started with. So I started with 3.5, I multiplied by something less than 1, 2/3, so my product should be less than 3.5, the number that I started with. The reason this is true is because when you multiply by something less than 1, in this case 2/3, you are taking part, 2/3 is a part of a whole. I'm taking part of, remember times means of, I'm taking part of 3.5. So I'm going to end up on this side with something less than I started with, less than 3.5. Let's talk about that second rule. The second one says that if I multiply something by 1 or something equivalent to 1, then my number will stay the same. So if I had, again, 3.5, we'll stick with that as our number, but this time I multiplied by 4/4, I want to know, is that going to be less than, greater than, or equal to 3.5? Well, we know that anything times 1 is itself. So 4/4 is equivalent to 1 whole. So 3.5 times 1 whole is going to be 3.5. So these are equal. That was rule 2. Finally, our third rule says that if I multiply a number by something greater than 1, the product will be bigger than the original number. So if I keep my number of 3.5, but this time I multiply it by something bigger than 1, like 1 2/3, I want to know again, is it going to be greater than, less than, or equal to the number I started with, 3.5? In this case, I'm multiplying 3.5 by something bigger than 1. 1 2/3 is greater than 1. So it says that the product will be bigger than the original number, 3.5. The reason this works is because 1 2/3 is like taking more than one group or multiple groups of 3.5. So if I'm making multiple groups of 3.5, I'll have more than I started with. If we have 20 kids in our class and I make clones and replicates of our class, then I'll have more than I started with. So if I multiply it by something more than 1, you get more than what you started with. We're going to break this down and look at one more example of each of the 3 rules. So if I had 3/5 times 4 2/3, and I want to know, is it greater than, less than, or equal to 4 2/3? Okay, I'm comparing to 4 2/3, so I don't need to look at this number over here. What I need to look at is 3/5. Okay, so this is less than 1, so it tells me that I'm taking part of 4 2/3. So if I'm taking just a part of 4 2/3, I will have less than 4 2/3. So this will be less than 4 2/3. So less than would be the correct answer. Okay, another example of rule 2. If I were to multiply 3 3/5 by 10 tenths, I want to know, would that be less than, greater than, or equal to 3 3/5? Again, 3 3/5 is my constant, so I want to look at this number here. 10/10 is equivalent to 1 whole. So I'm multiplying 3 and 3/5 by 1 whole. So I will get, or something equivalent to 1 whole. So I will get exactly 3 and 3/5. So equal is my answer in this case. And last but not least, if I were to multiply a number like 4 and 1/3 by something greater than 1, like 2 and 1/7, I want to know, is that greater than, less than, or equal to 4 and 1/3? Again, 4 and 1/3 is my constant, so I'm going to look at this number here. You're always looking at the number that's different. I want to know if it will be greater than, less than, or equal to 4 and 1/3. Well, I'm taking multiple groups, a little more than 2 groups of this, so it will be greater than 4 and 1/3 because I'm taking multiple groups of 4 and 1/3. In these cases, you could also estimate. This is about 4 times 2, so I'm going to get about 8 on this side and about 4 on this side. 8 is bigger than 4. Now we're going to try some problems without having the rules listed in front of us. This is really going to challenge you to use your reasoning skills. If I had 1 and 2/7 times 4 and 1/9, and I want to know, is that greater than, less than, or equal to 4 and 1/9? Again, 4 and 1/9 is my constant, so you want to look at the number that's different. So 1 and 2/7. 1 and 2/7 is greater than 1. So that means I'm taking more than 1 multiple groups of 4 and 1/9. So I'll have more than I started with. So this product is going to be bigger than just 1 4 and 1/9 because it's bigger than 1. Okay, let's look at another one here. And if you need to keep the rules up in front of you as you're learning this, that's totally fine. Hopefully you can kind of get used to those 3 rules and use your reasoning skills a bit more though. If I had 1/3 times 2 and 1/5, and I want to know, how does that compare to 2 and 1/5? Is it bigger than 2 and 1/5, less, or equal? I'm going to look again at the number that's different, which is 1/3 here. 1/3 is less than 1. So if I thought about it with my reasoning, I would know that I'm taking just a part of 2 and 1/5. If I take just a part, a third of it, I'm going to have less than a whole 2 and 1/5. You can also think about rule number 1. If you multiply by something less than 1, this product will be less than your original number. I want you to go ahead and try this one on your own. I want you to first try it by using your reasoning skills. So think, am I taking part of the number? Am I multiplying it by 1? Or am I making multiple groups of that number? So your problem is 4 and 1/9 times 6 and 2/3. And I want to know, how does that compare to 6 and 2/3? So again, try and use those reasoning skills. Am I making multiple groups of 6 and 2/3? Am I making just one group of 6 and 1/3? Or am I taking part of 6 and 1/3? If you need to, flip back to one of those first slides where I list all 3 of the rules to help you. Or maybe you might want to write them down on an index card or on a piece of paper for you to keep and use as we do this topic. Good luck.